Hello, in today's episode, we're going to go over the different types of developers in the IT industry.
Hey, what's up?
I'm the Coder Kid.
And I'm Mr. Miyagi, and welcome to our show. All right, let's jump right on in. Front-end developers.
Yeah, so what are front-end developers? What do they do?
Well, front-end developers are developers that take UI designs, they take storyboards, stories, screenshots, HTML, CSS, and they basically design the presentation or the front end or what is displayed on a web application or web page.
Right. Yeah, and just in the recent years, it's gotten pretty complex on the front end.
Yeah.
Whereas you're having front end systems that are almost as complex as the back end systems.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And with these new frameworks that have come out now, traditionally, front end developers they primarily use JavaScript or jQuery, and today we've got a robust set of
SPAs.
Frameworks that are being used on the front end, and it has created a new career path for development and for developers, because now you're seeing logic that used to coincide or be on the back end. You're getting the same type of complexity on the front end.
Yep.
So what frameworks are front end developers using these days?
Yeah, so if you want to spot out a front end developer, or you're curious in what technologies they're using, the popular things you're going to see is JavaScript, TypeScript. Those are two heavily used. Everything's going to be in JavaScript. TypeScript's more of a, I think Angular's adopted it, and it's more strongly typed language. And once you get into it, if you haven't, you'll know what that means.
Right.
But you'll see a lot of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS for just displaying elements on the screen.
Right.
But how that functionality actually takes place, say I click this button and it changes from green to blue, that's done through JavaScript.
Right.
And obviously it's much more complex than that.
Oh yeah.
But that's
a basic,
easy to draw what it actually is.
Right. And we've seen you mentioned Angular. So that's one of the new front-end JavaScript frameworks that are out there, and really the industry has focused in on three major frameworks.
Angular is your framework, and then UX libraries that are popular are React and Vue. Very popular. All three are for SPAs. Which is this new concept of single page applications where your page doesn't truly refresh.
Right. Yeah. And just to throw it out there, we're both pretty well versed on front end. You probably more than me. I'm not as engaged in front end development as you are, but I do support front-end developers and actually do some user stories when in an agile environment. So it's definitely a path that you can take to build a career.
It's a path for sure that you can go down, which maybe 5-6 years ago it wasn't really an option. Because we were so heavy in the server side languages. It was doing all of the logic. Right. And you were just kind of displaying and maybe doing some light JavaScript up there, and with jQuery and stuff like that. Right.
And I remember back 5-7 years ago when we were just using jQuery. A lot of the stuff, a lot of the logic that you were writing was maybe disabling a button or disabling text boxes until certain things were met.
Very simple.
Yeah.
But it was all like, you would know that stuff right when the page loaded. Right. Yes. Which is now you may do something over the left and it may change the way something needs to display on the right.
Exactly.
That's what makes it really different than it was 10 years ago.
Exactly. And I remember just writing some type of registration form where, everything was read only, and as you filled in these different fields, based on your selections, we would enable
Yep.
another drop down or populate drop down
Right.
values,
Yep.
based on your
Without
selections.
refreshing.
Yeah,
Yep.
without refreshing the
Yep.
page. So front end development has come a long way, because you used to have to do page loads or
Right.
refreshes and things like that. So now, these frameworks, they're just basically applications right out on the front end, and they're getting more and more complex today.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I kind of emphasize in front end development. So where can developers start today? If you're a new grad or someone not even in college, but you're interested in this field,
Right.
how can you start front end development? I think there's popular tools out there. W3schools.com. That was very popular years ago and still is. I still go on there sometimes if I'm forgetting something. And that really, they do a lot of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Right.
But they have it all. They have
they have
server
everything.
side and everything.
Yeah, and you're going to get just the basics. I mean, you're not going to find a complex solution to your company's going to need for you to write, but it gives someone who is entry level or has never even done it before, the information that they can use to create and learn these simple concepts with front end development. But I also would encourage young students that are in high school to take development classes as quickly as possible. And you're not going to get into complex server-side logic, in high school. Maybe you do. I don't know. I'm Mr. Miyagi, so I'm old, and school. I went to school back in the '80s, but I'm sure that there are high school courses that kids can take that will teach them the basics of front end development.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah. So that, and if you're not, maybe a boot camp.
Right.
Sign up for a boot camp or take a couple of the community college courses.
Yeah, and I would stress on this one to really learn JavaScript and the fundamentals.
Yes.
It's easy to take all these new things like TypeScript and your frameworks, Angular and Vue, and kind of learn and React and learn those, want to master those. But really, you're going to get so much more value from learning the core JavaScript behind the scenes. A book I actually keep on my desk as the Bible of front-end development, I think, is the JavaScript, The Good Parts book. It's a 100-page book. I don't know exactly. Someone's going to comment and say, no, actually, it's 120. But it's the Bible, and I always go through there just to reference from time to time. And it's easy to not do that because you're learning these new frameworks, and you get a lot of people that know these like Vue, but they really don't know JavaScript. And it's so weird to have that dynamic. Just the tools. I mean, we're prisoner of the tools we have, I guess.
Right. But it's definitely a career path that you can take, and today it's an exploding career path that is creating a lot of jobs out in the market these days.
Yeah,
so
for sure. And definitely cater to the younger generation.
Yeah.
Because that's where I kind of took my path down, and I'm seeing a lot of younger people in it than the reverse, obviously.
The more senior you are, I mean, we all go through phases throughout the years of what is niche and what is the latest thing, and
just stuff changes, right?
So
back
fast.
20 years ago, you weren't doing
it.
Front end. There was no such thing.
When I was a junior developer, I didn't have these frameworks or anything, so I was primarily just doing back end stuff. So
so let's segue into that. So back end developer is the next type.
Okay.
So what do they do? What kind of says, hey, I'm a back end developer?
Well, back end developers usually they develop logic and they develop algorithms for, let's just say, accessing data or doing server side logic on the back end that will be presented to the front end developers. So let's just take polling for customer information. A front end developer will develop all of these UI designs to show the data that is going to be presented to a user. So they have to go get the data. So back-end developers create all of the server-side logic that accesses a database, pulls that customer information from a database table, and you may have a service layer in the middle that does some type of data massaging.
Right,
and
displays it in a somewhat meaningful way to the front end.
Right. And then that data is sent back to the front end for it to be displayed.
Yep.
So and that is traditionally in the last 15, 20 years, where a lot of jobs in the IT industry were. Right. You didn't have to have a robust front-end developer to sit here and come up with the design and complexity for UI. Yeah. You were just asking for data, and then it was being returned, and all of that data and how it was returned, and the format it was in back-end development. So. Yeah.
Websites weren't that fancy.
Yeah, no, they were not. Definitely not.
The 2000s. Go look at some websites from the 2000s.
Right. And in back-end development, there's two primary kings of back-end development, and that's Java and .NET.
Yep,
so
C#
C# and
PHP.
Well, I was going to get into that. Those are the two king ones. If you're talking about enterprise, business, web applications, and things like that, those are
right. Yeah, for business applications. For sure.
Definitely you have other languages like PHP and Ruby on Rails.
Ruby on Rails is the framework.
Okay,
but Ruby, Python, stuff like that.
Yeah, for me personally, I've been in the .NET world my entire career, so I can't really speak intelligently about the other ones.
That's why I caught you before you said Ruby on Rails.
But that's the beauty of it, is that you can concentrate. I want to be a back-end developer, but what type of back-end developer do I want to be? Do I want to be a Java back-end developer? Do I want to be a C# back-end developer? Do I want to develop with PHP?
And look at your region. So look at your region and what jobs are around you. Like, I know the West Coast is really heavy in Java.
Right.
If they have C# developers out there, but they're really heavy in Java.
Oh yeah, and in particular in our area, I think
it's flipped.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's why it's important, I think, to look at where, unless you're just open. If you're open to anything, and obviously there's Java developers where we're at. We don't discriminate.
No.
But there are a lot of C# opportunities out there.
Right.
Sure.
No, and definitely, you can make a solid impact on your career with any one of those. You can make a decent living. You can excel.
And you can jump too. Like, I think we could jump easily to Java, and vice versa. We could take on a Java developer, and he'd get the ropes because you know the fundamentals of server-side programming.
Okay, so Drew, where do you recommend that someone who wants to get into back-end development, where should they start, and what resources should they use to gain some knowledge in back-end development?
Yep. So I think back-end development, a good place to start would be like Udemy or Pluralsight. Some of these, there's a bunch of training platforms out there. That are video based. If you don't learn video based, you can do a lot of dig into the documentation. Right. But I think it's important to learn a popular architecture. So like MVC is really popular. That's kind of molding into more of a web API structure. But kind of dig into those, and through that you'll learn a server-side. Pick a server-side language, and then just dive immediately into that and learn that. I think that's a good place to start.
Agree. And when you start taking these classes, you'll see very quickly how the back end development and the front end development is married together.
Right. Yep.
Which could take us into our next type of developer, which would be a full stack developer.
Yeah.
Which is a combination of both front end development and back end development.
So this is where we live. So I'm a full stack developer with the emphasis on front end.
Yep, and I'm a back-end developer with an emphasis.
Full stack developer.
Full stack developer with an emphasis on the back end. Now, I am serviceable when it comes to front end development, but you know,
and I'm the same way with back end, right?
Drew's got a heavy front end
skill
set, and you know, mine has traditionally been just on the back end, and it isn't until recently in these years that I've been able to explore and get better at it.
That's just due to age too, probably.
Well, it is. It's due to age, and it's
probably
due to
when you came in, it was heavy on the server side, so that's what you're gonna know,
right.
And when I was coming in, it was kind of, you could take two different paths. You can do the new stuff on the front end, or and go deep in the back end. And I always wanted to be full stack. I think it's cool, but there are some limitations to being full stack. So it sounds like, you know how you would put it, a jack of all trades, right? Which we are, but you can poke holes in a full stack developer. I mean, that sounds bad, but we're obviously, if you have a front end developer that's been doing front end only for 5 years, and you have a back end developer that's been doing nothing but database work and stuff in the back end for 5 years, obviously you're full stack developer, it's not like we put in more time than the other two. So you're obviously going to be a little weaker in everything. You're kind of like a jack of all trades.
Yes, and you'll see in the development cycle how you know, someone who is primarily, you know, back end but is also, you know, operating in a role as a front end developer, you'll see that part of the cycle be a little slower than it would be in something that is strong suit. So you know, I believe in full stack development, me personally, but you know, you hit it on the nail. In my opinion, it's a jack of all trades, because someone who specializes in Vue.js is going to whip out, you know, and finish stories and you know, complete their work faster than someone like myself who does it only 40% of the time.
You're just not in it all the time.
Right. And that's not to say it's a bad thing, but you know, some companies have to, you know, utilize full stack developers because they don't have the resources to break up their teams into just, you know, front end and just back end.
Well, not like they have to, like, all we could find is a full stack.
Well,
like,
no, I meant from a financial perspective.
But
you know,
it's. I think there's some pros to being a full stack, because I mean, you can pay one developer and he can kind of do it all. I don't. So if I'm only a front end developer, I stop at the API call. I'm sending a request and then I don't know what's going on. I mean, I thought that's why I like a full stack developer role, because I kind of know what's going on everywhere. I can move in the service layer, I can go in the front end layer, do this and that. Obviously I have a strength of the front end, so you would just think I'm a little weaker in the back end once you get into database reporting and all that stuff, obviously, and I'll admit that. And then you would assume the vice versa with you. If you had an emphasis on back end, you're going to be weaker on the front end.
And our first job that we worked together, we were completely full stack developers, where we handled a complete, you know, story for a specific piece of requirements that needed to be developed. You know, we both operated in full stack roles. And you know, when we transitioned from there to our last job that we worked together, that's where we had the separation of front end and back end development. And you know, we've seen both work really well together.
And it makes you serviceable as a full stack. You can do that. You can decide one day that, hey, I don't really like this full stack game. I like JavaScript in the front end way more than I like the database stuff. And you can make that decision and dive it, like you said at our last place. I was on the front end team and you were on the back end team. And we did not touch the other layers. We were not allowed. I don't know if we weren't allowed, but we didn't.
Well, we didn't
cross. We didn't cross over.
We had teams and responsibilities, and
even though that bugged me sometimes, because I'm like, I know I'm not afraid of the back end. I'm a pretty good back end developer myself, so I can get back there. But it was such a divide, and I don't like that, which is why I'm a full stack developer.
But it all came together on the data contracts. You know, what data was going to be returned and to the front end, and you know, that's the center point for both. And like we said earlier, front end development has come a long way, and some of the business decisions that you make on the back end are starting to be made on the front end also. Yep. So you still get the same flavor and you still get the same responsibility and things like that. I after working in both, I think that there are some advantages and disadvantages, and we can always discuss that in another episode, because when you split the teams, in my opinion, it kind of slows delivery down just a bit.
Right. Yeah, it depends if your teams aren't on the same level. If your front end people aren't as strong as where your back end are in their respective domains, right? Then it can definitely
and sometimes a simple back end procedure that's going to return data to a front end interface. There may be more complexity on the front end, because that's what's happening now these days. You're seeing more and more complex front end interfaces, and really, I need data. Back end developers, they write the logic to pull the data, and there may be some type of business rules that are applied to it, and it gets sent out to the front end. But there are far more decisions that need to be made on the front end, and far more massaging of data, and not just data. I mean, just the look and feel too.
And that makes Scrum really interesting in like a story fashion, where you have half back end, half front end. It's it makes it a little complex, and when you're trying to estimate and stuff like that.
Right.
Which you can easily separate that up. You can do back end stories and front end, I guess. But usually I think of a story as a piece of deliverable functionality, piece of functionality.
And in our last job that we worked together, they had stories, and then they had subtasks that were front end subtasks and back end subtasks, and they were just designated with the FE. FE for front end and BE for back end. So you still had to work together, and in my opinion, it flowed really well. It flowed really well.
Yeah. So let's talk about where they can start if they want to be if they love full stack development, or the idea of it, like we do. Obviously, we went down that path. I don't plan on changing anytime soon, so I'm gonna be a full stack developer if I can. Where can they start, do you think?
Well, we touched on where you should start if you're a front end developer
and a
back end developer. I think that if you do a mixture of both, then your learning curve will you'll get better at it. But in my opinion, I think you should decide which one you want to concentrate on first, and learn that, be skilled in that, and then tackle the other side of the spectrum, whichever one you decide to go through.
And for these, if you're front end or back end, you're obviously going to go more depth into that. But as a full stack, when you're first learning it, you do want to emphasize on one of those layers at the beginning. But then at a certain point, you're going to be more breadth. You're going to learn a little bit here, learn a little bit here, and just learn it all at once instead of, I mean, and obviously you'll just have an emphasis. That's kind of how it works. So I don't know anybody out there who will be like, I'm a full stack developer. I'm just as good as at the front end as I am the back end. It just doesn't work out that way.
So. And you can always start out with just simple, I have a form and I want to, submit user information, first name, last name, phone number, and address. Get the front end to look the way you want it to look like with these text boxes and things like that. Learn to make a call to the server side, and then learn a simple pathway to saving that information to a table in a database.
And with all these, like, just take the technologies we're saying to use and just dive in, create something. Half the battle is just doing. So just get in there.
There's a starting point, but once you get past that starting point, you can start adding more and more elements to it, and that's how you evolve and you get better and better.
Because I know when I was in college, I did a lot of like technical reading. I would read deep in the books, and that's not really the way to like learn. I mean, it's good. You definitely need that, but I think you just need to start creating stuff. You have these people coming in that are really book smart, and they just can't practically create software. Like they know the theory really well. They just can't do it when it comes time to.
Okay.
So let's dive into some of the different roles that aren't necessarily web development. We went over those really deep because that's what we know.
Right. Right.
But let's go into mobile development, which is another popular avenue for developers. And you're still a software engineer. You just create apps for Apple and Android devices.
Right, right. And admittedly, this is not my area of expertise. Drew has done some mobile development, some on the light, on the light side. Would you say it's light work or?
Yeah, no, I mean, like through college when I was kind of deciding what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I did a couple projects in, like I have a couple apps out there today.
Right. Right. And see, back then for me, mobile development wasn't even
wasn't an option, so you just never went into it, right? And that's understandable. So for mobile development, it's going to cross paths with the back end development, where you need a server side language. So Java and Kotlin for Android, and then Objective C and Swift for iOS. Is kind of where you're going to go down, and they're server-side languages. There is some carryover with web development. If you come from that background and you want to switch over to mobile, say like I'm done with this web stuff, I want to create apps for people, which is something I've battled with in the past. Like personally, I'm like, apps is kind of where it's going maybe, or I've thought. And I've been able to do it with front-end technologies. They have these, and they're not as powerful and as fast and as, they're not as great as the native capabilities. Like you're going to get further in a server-side language, obviously. Right. Like when performance really matters and stuff. But it's a great way to dig into it and kind of see the capabilities of the different devices and stuff.
So what resources or what development tools would someone need to go down this career path as far as mobile development goes?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this stuff is going to come down to just doing it and getting into these training platforms like Pluralsight, like Udemy. They're going to have courses on iOS development, Android development. I would definitely pick a path. So pick either Android or iOS. I wouldn't pick hybrid right out of the gate. You need to go deep into one of these areas, whether it's Android or iOS. Maybe the device you have. If you're an Apple fanboy or an Android fanboy, probably worth going in that because you'll need to test it.
Right. And I think that's probably where a lot of young people that want to get into software development, that's probably where they're going to start now these days.
Yeah, because they can relate to an app.
Yeah.
It's good and bad. I'm sure they're like, "What's a website?" Yeah.
Right, and I'm sure.
I mean, they know the website on their phone,
right?
But they always know.
Yeah, I've always wondered how this app works. Maybe I would just love to be a person that writes applications for my phone and stuff like that. So it's possible.
And as web developers, we're kind of catering to the phone as well already. Yeah, that's a lot of our a lot of the front end development. The stuff for that is like learning how to code on different browsers. Different browsers behave
you're talking
differently.
Responsive design.
And then responsive with the mobile tablets, desktop. You're that's a lot of the front end software.
Well, I was going to say, when you talk about that, is that more front end and it's not really a JavaScript or a TypeScript language. It's CSS. Which some people can say that CSS is a language, but.
Well, let's go into that. So one of the avenues that we didn't know if we wanted to put on here, but we think it's relevant because there is some language to it. It's not straight English.
Right.
So it is some coding involved, and we have two of those here. Let's dive into the first one, which is a web designer.
Right.
So what is a web designer? What do they do? They're not really always called web designer, but we're going to call them that today.
Yeah.
So what do they do?
Well, web designers, they primarily do mock-ups of what a user interface is going to look like for a web application. So let's just say you have a basic, simple example. A customer. We've been talking about customer. A customer interface that displays customer information. First name, last name, address, phone number, and then maybe some other interests that he has or other information that he has. Right. And that is a design, a look and feel that a UI designer or web designer will come and create one for a company based on what they think they want.
Right. So the languages they kind of use is part of the front end engineer path. So the HTML, the CSS.
Yeah.
They don't really dig into JavaScript. They might do a little bit of scripting, but
yeah, maybe
they really rely on this HTML, CSS, being responsive, stuff like that.
Right. And it also depends on the scale too. I mean, some companies have simple web design and they need people to pump out these designs. Continuously and things like that. And then there are more larger companies that have more robust, more complex designs. And the further you go along in your career, the more complex the project you'll be able to take on.
Right.
It's just like every other type of programming. So
yeah, and this can be a good starting point if you really want to be a software engineer. I wouldn't stay in this area for too long because you could go into this and have a route of being like a UX designer, a UX person, where you're not writing code, you're kind of thinking about user interaction. And it's a perfect career and it's fine and dandy. It's not a software engineer path.
Right.
But it's you're able to go down it, but that's why I wouldn't stay in this space too long. I think if it gets you in the door somewhere, then maybe it's okay, and then I would learn JavaScript as fast as you can, because that's really the differentiator between these web designer roles and an actual front end software developer.
Right, and I think also when you go the web design route, we've seen what people are now calling UI UX designers.
Yep.
A company may not know what they want as far as a user interface goes. They just know that we have these data, this collection of data that we need to present, and we need someone with a creative mind to come up with different types of layouts that we can use. Right. That we'll go into a meeting and we'll figure out which ones we want. You'll come up with 3 or 4 different designs, and they may pick one and then tweak that a little bit more, and the UX designer is responsible for taking those suggestions or modifications and then molding it into something that the company will want, because a lot of times they don't really know, they just have these data points, and it's up to the UX designer to use his creativity to come up with something that the company thinks they want.
Right. Yeah, and it's a good path. They make plenty of money, believe me. Yeah. So you can definitely go down that path. But we're concentrating on developers, so we thought it was worth mentioning that role.
Yes.
But if you're wanting to really get into development, learn JavaScript as fast as you can, as well as you can, and you can move into that front end role. Right. And then you're just stepping up the ladder, or you can stay front end, like we talked about. That's a completely fine career path. So let's go into the other option there that's not really development, but it's kind of there, is the QA, the manual QA folks. So they may write some really light scripting, might have to query data because they have to look in SQL to see if these databases are projecting the right data.
Right, yeah.
So I've had QAs ask me. They usually come and ask me for the query.
Right, yeah.
But some of them are self-sufficient enough to actually write them themselves. They can query.
Yeah.
So...
Well, you have, in a QA tester or a QA engineer, you have either manual testers or automated testers.
Yeah. So automated is more of the development path. Manual QA gets into it a little bit.
Right.
Again, if you wanted to be a developer, I would go into that QA automation role.
Yes.
They'll use your server-side languages. I know Selenium is a popular tool choice there.
Right.
I just hear it all the time.
Yeah.
I don't really mess with it or anything. But I know that's popular. I don't know if that's a C# only thing or. So I want to talk about the automation engineer, and certain companies will call this role software engineer and test, which I think is not very honest.
Right.
You can be a developer and you really aspire to be a software engineer and you take one of these roles. Not saying you can't get out of one of these roles, but just know they're QA automation roles.
Right.
They're testing, they're not software development. And I know some big companies out there use this software engineer and test thing.
Right.
And I'm sure people go into it and they can get out of that. Especially it's another one of those things, if it gets you in the door, why not?
Yeah.
I didn't do it, never thought about doing it, but maybe if the right company, I don't know. But just be aware of that title. If that's not what you want to do, but that is a QA automation role.
Okay.
So let's go into embedded development. So you're talking about getting really close to the hardware. So like I talked about Seagate Technology, and if I wanted to be a software engineer, there's a pretty strong likelihood I would be a firmware or an embedded developer. Where I would be coding like hard drives. Really close in like C. So C, C++, that's where you're going to see with this stuff. Really big in aerospace too. So if you think about those systems, operating systems, stuff like that, stuff that's really close to the hardware, that's going to be embedded software development.
Right.
I just wanted to mention that because it's not something we're well versed in.
Right.
I know in school a lot of kids went this path, or they would really like, and where you can start is with a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino board, which is kind of this board with a bunch of circuits and stuff and pieces you can piecemeal together and write a program for. They're really cool. I just didn't want to take that path, but I know a lot of kids, they would bring their Raspberry Pi in and really have fun with it, and it's really close to the hardware. So if you like that, if you're like one of those people who are software engineers aren't really real engineers because there's no physical stuff, which is total BS, I think. But because I mean, some elements of the abstract world that we deal with is way more complex than some of these engineer types. So I laugh at that every time. But if you feel that way, and there are people who feel that way, look into embedded development, and you can still feel like you're an engineer, I guess, right? If you don't feel like the other way is. So after that, let's go into DevOps engineer.
DevOps. Good old DevOps. Well, again, that's more of a supporting. It traditionally has always been a supporting role to my role. But I do know that there are DevOps engineers that configure deployments. That configure source control libraries and things like that. Not something that I've done personally myself, but I've had to interface with those individuals that do. And
it's a lot of resource allocations, and they're always looking at if your server is being overloaded with data, or if it's running slow, how to tweak that to get it running. If you need new servers brought up, new web servers. Especially with things, the architectures coming out that are more like microservices, and you
Right.
have so many resources than you did with just the monolith.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you're having more of these DevOps roles even at smaller companies. So traditionally you would see them at larger companies.
Right. Right.
Or that's where I first got introduced to them when I was at ESPN. We had a group of guys that did all this stuff. So resource management, tearing down, bringing up servers. You'll see a lot of people in the cloud, Azure and AWS. Nowadays, I mean,
Right.
back then you actually had the hard server
Right.
in a room. So that's a DevOps role, and where you can get started on that. You kind of need this other stuff first, so maybe full stack development, and then you can move into that role. That's kind of where you can get started on DevOps.
All right, that's a lot of information. I think we'll just go ahead and close out this episode. Hopefully we've given you enough information to help you decide, should you want to go into software development, which career path you want to specifically take.
Right.
And with that, we'll just say goodbye and see you in the next episode.